Thanks everyone for joining us for the 16th Annual LGBTQ Community Survey. I'm Thomas Roth. I'm the president and founder of Community Marketing and Insights. And
my name is David Paisley. I'm the senior research director here at CMI, and I've actually been with the company for over 20 years.
Many more than 20 years. All right, so I'm going to just make a brief introduction about our company for the few of you who may not yet know us. We are California-based, but our clients really span the world. We are notably 100% LGBTQ owned and operated. We are, I think, the only LGBTQ certified supplier that is fully LGBTQ focused as a market researcher. We've been doing this for 30 years. We started the company in 1992, and oh my God, who would have thought what we've been through over the past 30 years? What a roller coaster. But we do feel that we've contributed to the good stuff by presenting market research and training to hundreds or thousands of companies and organizations around the world who have benefited from our research. A lot of our research we post for free on our website. It's really to raise everybody's boat, and hopefully everybody on this call has or will benefit from what we're going to be presenting today. We base our research on our own panel of LGBTQ consumers across North America. Like every researcher, we do online surveys, focus groups, virtual focus groups, interviews, and so forth. However, our specialty is that we focus entirely on the LGBTQ community. So 30 years, numerous clients, gives us quite a knowledge base. So some of our clients are noted here. You'll see that about a third of them are in some world of finance, real estate, insurance, banking, investments. About a third of our clients are in tourism and hospitality. And many of you are on the call, and we love you. We started with tourism and hospitality, basically our first decade, and we've diversified since then. About a third of our clients are really running the gamut. Pharmaceuticals, communications, beverages, transportation, sports, media. We work with a lot of nonprofits. Right now we're working on a study for the Trevor Project. We just finished a study for GLAAD. We're working on a long study for the Human Rights Foundation, Human Rights Campaign Foundation. So this is wonderful for us. I love what we do. You can tell my enthusiasm perhaps because we learn so much. And we also work with various government organizations and universities. So let me introduce the survey itself before I turn it over to Dave to get started. To get a copy of the report, I will send out a link after this. So just send me an email, tom@CMI. Note that it's info, not com, cmi.info, and include your name and company and title, and I will reply back with a link to download the full report. So the way we work this, a lot of our clients and consumers of our studies ask us, well, how did you put this together? Because you'll see sometimes studies that, include maybe 200 or 300 LGBTQ people, and they say all LGBTQ people this, or all LGBTQ people that. That really makes us cringe because there's so much diversity within LGBTQ. If you look at their methodology, you'll probably find that it's pretty skewed. So we partner with, over the years, 300-400 organizations, events, media, influencers, community prides, film festivals, chambers of commerce, community centers. The reason we do this is because that's the way we get a really comprehensive, representative snapshot of the LGBTQ community. And so it's really important that when you look at research that you see that it is very representative of the entire community and not skewed to one demographic. And so we partner with these organizations. It's win-win. They promote the survey for free to us. We diversify our panel and our participants, and we send them their data. So they're able to use that data for, talking to advertisers and sponsors and so forth. So it's really been win-win. We're on our 16th year, so obviously it's working. And it's really been a great formula. So now I'm going to turn it over to Dave. We're going to bounce back and forth a little bit, but I want him to explain our methodology of how we approach this survey. Go ahead, Dave.
Great, thanks, Tom. And just to say that when CMI does custom survey, the response tends to come more from our internal LGBTQ panel. And honestly, the way you do that type of research is a little bit different, as I have a little bit more control, I'd say, over my own panel. But this particular survey you have less control over, because again, as Tom said, we have over 100 different media and organizational partners promoting the survey from around the country. And responses are coming in just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds every day. In the end, we had just over 14,000 people complete the participants. These are LGBTQ people in the United States. And because I don't have total control over who's coming in, weighting becomes really important on a project like this. Most of the time when we do custom research, often I don't even have to weight it because it comes in pretty representative of the entire community in percentages that make sense. Here, the LGBTQ media does actually reach more men. It does reach actually a little bit more older LGBTQ people. And because of that, weighting becomes a little bit more important. So I think what's interesting about this is, although it does skew a little bit more male and older, because we have such huge numbers on every gender, ethnicity, and age subgroup, we're able to weight that in order to make sure that it is representative in this particular research. So this is our weighting assumptions here. Cisgender, gay, and bisexual men are weighted at 44%. Cisgender, lesbian, bi plus women are 44%. The transgender and non-binary community is weighted at 12%. We weight the three major generations about equally. It's a little bit lower for 18 to 34 just because there are fewer years in that generation. And then we weight by race and ethnicity pretty much close to how the United States weights for adults in the general population. So that is the weighting. We have great numbers in all these different categories. And that allows us, even though we have this big group, to sort of weight it so it's representational of what's going on. Again, we have a little bit less control over the response of this particular research. And the other thing to say about the research is that it was fielded in April 1st through May 31st. So a little bit before a lot of Pride advertising happens, which traditionally happens in June. We actually wanted to get it done before that advertising comes out. But timeframes matter when a survey is fielded. So do keep that in mind. It was fielded over 2 months in April and May of 2022. Next slide. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about the impacts of the outreach to the LGBTQ community. So this is do you agree or disagree with the following statements about corporate involvement in the LGBTQ community? And that is a hot button issue right now. So it's a hot button issue because a lot of LGBTQ community members are really talking a lot more today about this sort of like, queer washing or LGBTQ washing, where corporate America maybe is looking to sell us products, but maybe doesn't really have our backs. And that's been something that's really been discussed a lot lately, especially in relationship to Pride. But nonetheless, I think for the majority of the community, when a corporation does it well, and does it appropriately, the percentages are really good. So, the thing of I think more positively about companies that sponsor LGBT community organizations and events. Most of the LGBTQ community, 3 out of 4, agree with that. I'm more likely to purchase from a company that outreaches to the community. Again, quite high. I think more positively about companies that advertise in the LGBTQ media. Again, really quite high. And also that LGBT supportive companies have made a positive difference for their employees, again, quite high. What I really found that this year and last year, though, is this concept is that when you bring in Pride and some of the pink washing that has been talked about in the community so much in relationship Pride, that the number drops a lot for the statement corporate presence at LGBTQ Pride events is a positive for the community. So that's a concern. I think that's a concern for Pride organizations and the corporations that sponsor Pride to make sure that those corporations that are part of Pride are really, truly LGBTQ supportive, and they are not particularly making political donations to politicians that are anti-LGBTQ. But I also want to say this whole concept of corporate present LGBTQ Pride, it's really being driven by young people. It's interesting, even though that percentage there is like 53%, only 27% of LGBTQ people under the age of 35 agreed with that statement. So that's a big change. And then it's actually up in the 70s for baby boomers, right? So that's a big generational difference, is that older people like me, who were one of the first generations actually to invite corporations to our pride, are still pretty positive about that. But for younger generations, they're much more skeptical about corporations. Next slide, time. All right, a little bit about perceptions of supportive activities. And then below, the question here is, below our activities are often used by companies to show support for the LGBTQ community. Which of these activities best demonstrate to you that the company or corporation is supportive? And the number one is openly supporting LGBTQ equality legislation. You may have noticed that America has become very political lately. It has been for quite some time, but really a lot lately. It's a very divided country. And what the LGBT community is really looking for corporations now more than anything is that they have our backs politically. And that means two things: actively supporting legislation that supports LGBTQ equality, but now more so than ever, and that is not donating to politicians that are actively against the LGBTQ community. And it's caused quite a bit of conflict within pride organizations. It's caused conflict within nonprofits who might be taking donations from corporations that are in essence doing both. They're doing both supporting the LGBT community and giving donations for business reasons. To anti-LGBTQ politicians. But it's a very controversial subject right now, and it's something that I think that all corporations and nonprofits really need to pay attention to, because it's increasingly becoming more volatile, the community's opinion on this issue. Next slide.
Dave, before you move on, creates advertising featuring LGBTQ imagery. Why do you think that's so much lower than the activities that they do?
Well, I think the activities matter most. I mean, the first thing you need to do is walk the walk. So what happens is that there is some concern with corporations that they are just putting out LGBTQ ads and they really have no support for the community whatsoever. So creating advertising is not enough. And in it itself is not a supportive thing to do. It's only supportive when you have the policies and the actions that back it up. If it lives in a vacuum on a loan, you just have some ad out there and you've not shown to the community that you're supportive, sometimes it can do more damage than good.
That's great. Thank you.
All right, so this is a question we've been asking for a lot of years. I know a lot of corporations are really interested in this information, but the question has always been, in the past 12 months, which companies or brands have gone above and beyond to show genuine, authentic support for the LGBTQ community through their outreach and pro-LGBTQ policies and practices. Now, this is a write-in question, and it's not checked in. So it's really, I think, a powerful top of mind. You can write up to 5 companies, right? And then we painstakingly count all these companies with so many thousands of responses.
Just to emphasize, this is not a multiple choice. It's not check the box. You have to sit there and you have to think Target, Starbucks, Disney, and you write that in. That's a pretty good indication. Even though the numbers aren't huge, that's a really big piece of mind width that the community has for these companies.
And I also think it's impressive that companies like, say, Apple or Disney or Target can actually get, depending on the chart you're seeing, like 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 4 people in the LGBT community to actually remember it and write it. So that's really powerful, okay? So these particular companies go up and down through the years. We tend not to see actually huge changes. Like some of these companies like Apple and Target and Google and Subaru have been high on this list for a really long time. The only company that's really popped this year a little bit was Disney ABC. And I think that's because of when it was fielded. And it was fielded when Disney was standing up a little bit to the state of Florida around the, don't say gay legislation. So I think that really helped Disney a little bit during the fielding of this particular survey. I think the other thing to really watch here is that a lot of outreach goes to cisgender gay and bi plus men. And because of that, and there's less advertising that goes to cisgender women and the transgender and non-binary community, sometimes that really allows for smaller brands to pop up with the women and TGMB communities. So you see some brands on those lists that are really quite small, that have really done a big outreach, like say Tomboy X, to those communities. and it shows. So what I really want to say is, as a small brand, you really can make a difference and you really can make an impact. And that's what I think this chart can sometimes show. All right, next slide. All right, frequency of interactions with the LGBT media. This question is this, has your interaction with LGBT media, that includes all types of media, sort of changed over the last 12 months? And happy to say it's just stable. I mean, it's gone up a little bit, particularly with younger people, but it is stable. We're not really seeing decreases in the interaction of the LGBT community with, over time. So still very viable, still very important. Next slide.
All right.
All right, now I'm going to tell you a little bit about demographics. Some of this stuff I've gone over before, but we ask these demographic slides all the time. I asked the demographic slides for a couple of reasons. I think it's really good to track, but it's also good on a survey like this that has, a rotating set of LGBT media and organizations that are participating. It really helps us know that the data is stable. So in a question like this, what's your relationship status? If this would change 10% from last year, that would indicate that there's a problem with the methodology. It shouldn't change much at all, and it doesn't. It's really, really stable over time. So I think the two things I really want to point out here is that, and I know I've said this before, that is any given moment, lesbians and bi plus women are more likely to be in a relationship than cisgender, gay, and bi plus men. And that matters because from a lot of ways, from how we buy things, the kind of products that we buy, that can really be dependent on relationship status. So for a lot of our clients, this chart means a lot, because if a person's single in a relationship, really does affect who would buy their product. So it matters. And generally, the transgender and non-binary participants, they tend to be in between the cisgender women and men as far as the number that are in relationships. So, but this chart about relationship matters more than you might think to a lot of corporations or certain types of brands. The other thing that I want to point out is that we're not seeing, we're in like a place of stability on marriage. There was really an explosion, obviously, on same-sex marriage when it became legal many years ago. But over the last few years, it's just been a stable percentage. The number of new marriages is about equal to the number of divorces or people who lose a spouse through death. And we're in this really stable situation with marriage right now. These numbers for marriage have not really changed in years. Next slide. Defining relationships in the non-binary. A lot of people in the LGBT community talk about the concept of same-sex couples. We got to be careful about that. The LGBTQ community and our relationships are more complex. Our gender identities are more complex than just the word same-sex couples. And a lot of people in our community are non-binary or transgender couples or queer couples or in opposite sex couples. So you just got to be careful with that. I think the concept of same-sex couple, same-sex marriage is something that was talked a lot about in the not early years, but like 10 years ago during the marriage equality days. But we got to be careful about our language today, because same-sex couples as a term actually excludes a lot of people. A little bit more about LGBTQ parents, similar to the relationships. We're not seeing at CMI an LGBTQ parent explosion. That was somewhat predicted a while ago. It was predicted because a lot of LGBTQ millennials said that they wanted to have kids if they had the opportunity. And it was such a high percentage that we expected sort of like an explosion of LGBTQ couples having kids. Didn't really turn out that way. It's actually, the percentages are really quite stable over time. Cisgender, lesbian, and bi plus women are far more likely to have kids than cisgender, gay, and bi plus men. And again, the transgender and non-binary community tends to be in between the cisgender women and men. One thing that we don't want to ignore are the concept of baby boomer grandparents. A reasonable high percentage, like 19% of LGBTQ baby boomers are grandparents. And a lot of times they had these kids when they were in opposite sex relationships before they came out. Right. But there are a lot of grandparents out there, and it's something that it's its own market, especially with baby boomers just being this huge generation who have seemingly get more and more money over time. There's a lot of money to spend there, and some of that money is going to be spent on grandkids, particularly like travel, taking the grandkids to Disney or on a cruise or something like that. It's actually a topic that's really interesting to people in the travel industry. Next slide.
Now I'm going to talk a little bit about terminology. This is something, I'm Tom, for those who joined a little bit late. Terminology within the LGBTQ community is fascinating. This is a pulse that we take every year, and right for about 15 years, right, Dave? So
Yeah, I think
the
so.
terminology has really shifted. We used to be the gay community, then we were the gay and lesbian community, then we were the GLBT community, until LGBT took over. And now if you say GLBT, you're looked at as a dinosaur. So it's fascinating. We love this question. What we're finding this year is that LGBTQ, which has been probably the number one for 3, 4, 5 years, and LGBTQ plus are now virtually tied. The interesting thing is that LGBTQ plus has been sort of on a momentum of increasing. And my prediction is that LGBTQ plus next year, when you're tuning into our 17th annual survey report, will probably be number one. It is the trajectory to overtake LGBTQ, but I think you can be very confident in using either of those for probably at least a few years. The other thing that I want to call out is the increasing alphabet. We did test LGBTQIA+. It didn't get as high of a rating. And there are many iterations I want to call out. There's LGBTQA, there's LGBTI that's often used in Europe. But it's just not gaining the traction in North America as much as just sticking with LGBTQ or LGBTQ+. So I will say that if you're marketing in Latin America or Europe in particular, you're going to have to look at what the preferred terminology is there and use it. I know that in Europe it's LGBTI. You'll see that pretty frequently in Europe. I also want to put a little caution around queer. Queer is increasing in its popularity. I would say 5 years ago, that red band was much bigger, and especially among gay men, that the term queer was really perceived negatively. It's softening. I think more and more, I was listening to NPR this morning, and the broadcaster referred to the queer community, and I thought nothing of it. I'm an old gay man, and so I should have had my feathers ruffled by hearing that term, but I didn't, because it is being used more and more, and it is more comfortable for us to absorb. So again, looking at your markets, you need to kind of identify the best terminology. I also want to call out the trans and non-binary participants. You'll see that favorable LGBT 50%, LGBTQ 66, LGBTQ plus 71. So the more inclusive your terminology for the trans and non-binary community, the better. And keep that in mind, because as we evolve as a community and respect our trans and non-binary community members more and more, we will see that the need to be respectful of their preferred terminology to increase as well. Living in LGBTQ friendly communities, Dave, I'll turn that back over to you.
Okay, thanks, Tom. So the first question has been a lot of discussion in the general media about migration. There's been a lot of migration and moving. So we actually asked a series of questions about what's happening in the LGBTQ community this year. This is just a base question. What type of environment best describes a primary place in which you live? This has been tracked every year for a long time. We're not seeing a lot of changes in this at all. We hear a lot in the media about the concept of people leaving the big cities for the suburbs and smaller sized communities. We're just not seeing it in this survey. We're seeing the percentages being really quite stable. That's not to say that there isn't some migration happening right now, but we'll talk about that a little bit from state to state. But I think there's just sort of this equilibrium. I think some people are moving to the smaller communities, and I think a lot of people in smaller communities that want a more LGBTQ friendly environment are moving to the big cities. But when we look at it overall, we're just seeing stability in this particular percentages. We're not seeing differences. So I cannot sort of endorse the concept that LGBTQ people are also moving to smaller communities at this time.
I'd also like to say that the sort of stereotypical assumption is that gay men live in big cities. And although 41% do live in an urban or big city environment, 60% don't. So watch your assumptions, especially when you're looking at marketing to to the various segments of our community, and be sure that your outreach is inclusive as well. And obviously with the internet, that's very, very possible.
And what I'd also add to this, if you look at the two charts, the cisgender, lesbian, bi plus women are more likely to be a little bit more dispersed across many different kinds of communities. But what you can really see here, though, is transgender and non-binary participants are really less likely compared to the other segments to be living in big cities. And why that's important is that they have higher percentages in these sort of medium, smaller size communities and even small towns here. And these are the type of communities that are least likely to have, trans equality policies or laws on the local level. So we really need to understand that a lot of our transgender and non-binary community members are really living in places that just don't have that kind of protection. And that's why having that protection on the federal level will be important, but also on the state level. So the much as we can push for trans, non-binary equality and non-discrimination laws, the better on sort of these big jurisdictions like states and federal. So it just sort of creates a bigger circle of protection for transgender and non-binary people.
Good point, Dave. Thank you.
All right, a little bit about LGBTQ friendly environments. So we asked this question in a lot of years. I live in an LGBTQ friendly city, town, or local community. I live in an LGBT friendly state or province, and I live in an LGBT friendly country. I'll start at the bottom. I live in an LGBTQ friendly country, and this is just the United States participants here. And the percentage of United States residents thinking the country or United States is LGBT friendly is just plummeting. It was 56% said yes in 2021 and 40% in 2022, right? So that's a 16% drop in 1 year that we either strongly agree or somewhat agree. That's huge. So there's a real shift going on right now about how friendly we're perceiving our government, our federal government right now. And that's not only happening with LGBT issues, right? It's happening with reproductive rights. It's happening with a lot of different things out there. So there's a big shift in this country and there's a lot of fear in the LGBTQ community. I'll go one step up. I live in an LGBTQ friendly state and province. So there, the percentages get a lot higher than country, but it really depends by the state. And then we'll pop down to I live in an LGBTQ friendly state, states like California, New York, and 98% of the residents of California say that they live in an LGBTQ friendly state. That's amazing. And it's basically stable. But when I go to the bottom of this, it's really decreasing, particularly in Florida. It's lower in Texas than Florida. But Texas has always sort of been a little bit low. But what we really have seen in the last year is just a real plummeting of the number of Florida residents. Again, this isn't a national poll. These are the Florida people talking about their own states that agree that their state is LGBTQ friendly. So there's a lot of negative stuff happening in Florida right now that's negatively impacting the residents of that state. And then we go, I live in an LGBTQ friendly town or local environment. And nice to see here is that the vast majority of people feel that they do in fact live in an LGBTQ friendly local environment. Now that might be because we or specifically seek out more LGBTQ friendly places. So even if you are in a very conservative state, probably every state in America has some communities that are more LGBTQ friendly and more progressive. So people tend to get to places where they're going to be at least somewhat safe, right? That's not true for everyone. And I'm not saying that's even possible to happen for some people because of economic reasons. But as a community, we do tend to gravitate a little bit more to communities that we feel at least somewhat more safe. And we see this in this charts. Next slide. All right, LGBTQ migration. This is a new question. So what we did is we asked basically, did you move? Did you move in the last 2 years was the question here. And obviously because of COVID-19, we hear a lot in the media about the general population moving a lot. Now, the LGBT community, one of our traits is that we move a lot anyway. So one thing that you'll see with the community, independent of COVID and long before COVID, is that we are a community on the move. We tend to move both our cities and our residences much more so than other people. One of the reasons that we move so much, which is sort of a chicken or the egg kind of thing, but we are much, much less likely to own our own homes, which allow us to move a little bit more perhaps, or perhaps we move so much it's not a good idea for us to buy homes. I'm not sure which way that really goes. But we are a community that's always been on the move, especially our young people. So 18 to 34s had an incredible move rate. 57% of them said they moved in the last 2 years. And I thought, is that even possible? But then I thought back to when I was like 18 to 25. I probably moved every year to a new apartment or a new city. So I'm like, yeah, I guess that is possible because that just happens with young people. But what we really wanted to know was what's happening with this migration. Are people, are gay people or LGBTQ people leaving California and New York and moving to Florida and Texas? So we asked that population, where were you living? Where did you move to now? I think overall, the numbers are more muted than the general population, but we did see similar trends. We did see that overall, the New York region and the Midwest lost LGBTQ population. California lost some LGBTQ population. Well, we found increases in Arizona and Nevada. We actually found increases in Florida too. We found that people from New York and New Jersey were more likely to move down into Florida. We found that people in California were more likely to move to like Nevada and Arizona. And this is stuff that you might expect. We actually didn't see a change for Texas's population. So anyway, I think overall the numbers are more muted, or percentages are more muted for the LGBTQ community, but overall some of those similar patterns did exist with LGBTQ people over the last 2 years. But again, we got to put it in perspective. Going back to the slide, most people who moved, Tom, if you go backwards one, most people who moved actually stayed in the same region where they lived, or they moved to a different part of the state. You are much more likely to move to a different part of your own state than you were to move to a different state. All right, moving on. The reasons for moving, the number one was job and employment reasons. So that by far was the number of reasons. But number two is they wanted to improve the quality of their life in general. So that's something that we talk a lot about or hear a lot about in the media because of homelessness or housing prices or stuff like that. But the fifth one down is I wanted to live in a more liberal region. And you may see, okay, 20%, that's not so high, but that's really more amplified than you might think because some of us already live in liberal regions. So for 20% of the entire group to say that they moved to a liberal region, I think is more significant than you might think. So you might have this migration right now, sometimes within the own state or to other states of moving to more liberal places. If I had to predict and what I'm seeing as far as some of these trends is I would actually predict there's going to be sort of this reverse migration. I think some of these more conservative states are getting a little scary for LGBTQ people. And I think you might see some higher migration now to more liberal states. Right, Tom?
So now I'm going to chime in a little bit with LGBTQ travel, but before I do, I wanted to acknowledge that there's some really good questions coming in via chat, but because it's the me and Dave show, we're not really, it's a little distracting to break it up and refer to the questions, but there's some really good ones. I would say that if you would like, you can shoot us an email and we'd be happy to comment on your questions. Toward the end, I will display our email addresses so that you have easy access to us. So travel, as I mentioned in the beginning, about a third of our clients are in tourism and hospitality. I wanted to just sort of touch on a few travel specific questions that we included in this year's survey. I would say in general, and maybe no big surprise, travel is up. We did 3 periodic COVID-related travel surveys over the past, 2.5 years. And those are available for download off our website, but they're kind of antiquated at the moment because travel is just going crazy. I'm going to call out a couple specific improvements that we've seen in a minute, but it just really seems to me that the large numbers here indicate that there has been pent-up demand. We haven't had to spend money on travel, so there's obviously a bigger budget. Unfortunately, that bigger budget is going to higher airfares and expenses for travel, gas prices, and et cetera. But we have the interest and the wherewithal to travel, and that's really the point of this slide, is that there really is a pent-up demand, and we are rolling up our sleeves and heading out. I wanted to talk a little bit about the types of destinations we're visiting. We asked for the rest of the year, which types of destinations are you likely to travel to, not for business? And you'll see that visiting a big city and visit an outdoor adventure destination for vacation are highlighted by green. I want to explain why. During COVID, meaning October 2020, 25% indicated that they plan to travel, and that 25% of those who were going to take a vacation were going to travel to a big city. So what we saw was a big spike in smaller towns. Palm Springs, for example, saw a huge spike in travel and visitors at the expense of the big cities, I think. So 25% compared to 54% right now. So that's quite a jump. And visit an outdoor adventure destination for a vacation, 28% now. During COVID, 18%, and that 18% was high, actually, because a lot of people were migrating from the big city environment to more of an outdoor vacation. As Dave and I were chatting before the workshop here, the outdoor destination concept has really gained traction in the LGBTQ community. And I think that's something not to be overlooked. Every destination, New York City, Los Angeles, San Francisco, all the big cities included, have outdoor opportunities. And I think they really need to be emphasized in our communications now. We've gotten used to it. We're starting to really enjoy it. And being outdoors is something that I think all of the community is really getting used to. Where are we going? I called out Europe because I think 20% going to Europe is extremely high. That's not international travel, which includes Mexico and Canada or Caribbean. That's Europe. And I was one of the lucky ones to go to Europe. I just got back about a week ago. Oh my God, it is packed. The airports are insane. Please leave 5 hours to get through the chaos of immigration and security. It's just insane. I'd say everybody is in Europe right now. It's pretty crazy. So that Europe number is really good, especially if you're a European destination marketing to the United States. Feelings of safety have also increased year over year from the first time that we did a COVID-related travel survey. I would like to point out that really roughly 75% feel more or less comfortable on an airplane, versus when we did the survey during COVID, it was way lower. And that includes, the mask restrictions coming off. The survey was produced after that dropped. I think a lot of us probably listening right now and speaking do wear a mask on the plane. I certainly do, and through the airport. And that makes me feel safer. So I think that we know how to stay safe. And I think that that's not as much of a deterrent as it used to be. And types of travel activities. I really want to call this out because it sort of refers to the slide I touched on a couple minutes ago. Look at the top activities that we're enjoying while we travel now. The top 7 are all about being outdoors. And the bottom series is all about being indoors. So this is a huge shift. You can look back not that long ago, 2019 advertising to the LGBTQ community from tourism and hospitality, and you'll probably see images of pride and large parties and inside a bar, toasting with martinis. I would say shift your attention to outdoor opportunities in your destination. Again, whether you're in New York or San Francisco or Albuquerque, New Mexico, or Fort Lauderdale, it doesn't really matter. Everybody's got outdoor features to promote. And I would shift my focus, if I were one of those destinations, to feature the outdoor activities and not the big crowds of people that we were seeing before. And also that shift is more, in other studies we've done, more about being with your partner and being more romantic and not being with a large group of friends or in a large crowd of people. That's going to take a while, I think, after COVID, when/if there is an after COVID, for those scenes to be appealing again. Now, Dave's going to touch a little bit on consumer purchasing, and then we're going to wrap up.
And we aren't going to spend a lot of time on this because I think talking about, streaming television or satellite TV is very specific to different people on this call. So what I really want to just say is that this data exists. And if you have a company that this data is important to, reach out to me and I can help you out. But I'm not going to go over all this for all these different types of consumer products because I just don't think it's that interesting to most people. But I just want to point out that we do have now current data on sort of entertainment purchases. Tom, the next slide. Sort of large purchases in electronics. Also, Tom, next. We have a lot of data on alcohol purchases. So if you are an alcohol related company, we have a ton of background data there, not only on who is drinking, but on the next slide, what they're drinking. Is there another slide, Tom? Let's go on one more.
Nope.
So anyway, what I just want to say about this is that it exists, and I'm not going to go through it for everyone here because it's really industry dependent. But the data does exist in the background, and if you want to reach out to me, I can help you out to give you a better idea of what's going on in the LGBTQ community. But thanks, Tom.
Sure. So I want to wrap up with 3 key takeaways, which were sort of touched on in the early part. I don't care what your business is and what your budget is. You really can't afford to be all things to all LGBTQ successfully. So I would say use available research, including this one, custom research if you have the ability to identify the best matched customers or visitors and focus on those first. If you're just getting engaged in the LGBTQ community, please don't try to do a shotgun approach out there because you may be disappointed. But if you can focus on segments within LGBTQ where your product or service resonates, you'll probably start off being much more successful. The other thing is walk the walk, then talk the talk. Don't just go out there with an advertising campaign. It's really, like I like to say here, it's more important who you are and what you do than what you say. More and more. Dave and I have been doing this for 30 years. Over the years, this has become far more important than putting a little rainbow on your ad or turning your logo into a rainbow. That's nice, but it really needs to be supported by reality. And then what you do also is increasingly including who you're donating to in terms of politics, because we do notice, I think every community votes with their wallet. I think the LGBTQ community really is intensely aware of what companies are doing out there. We're paying attention and we're supporting companies that support us. And finally, yes, then you do need to advertise. It's great to support Pride. It's great to support the charities that support our community, but you got to get the word out because it's so important to our community. So how do you do that? Through advertising, through your website, through all your outreach. You do need to communicate it, but I would say that the first steps are really to be the change for the LGBTQ community. We do notice, we do appreciate it, and we definitely support companies that support us. So that's it. To request your copy of the full report, just shoot me a quick email, include your name, company, and title. It will be replied back to probably within 24 hours with a link to download the full report. Also, if you have questions, some of you had some really interesting comments as well. Please feel free to send that to us. I'm Tom at, David is David at CMI.info. Feel free to shoot us an email to request the report and or to further the conversation. So I'm Tom at CMI.info. David is David at CMI.info. We have a great team of people. As you may be able to tell, we love what we do. We're passionate about this. A lot of what we do is free and available on our website. For example, we have the last year we produced the Black LGBTQ Community Survey. That's really important to look at the intersectionality of communities within communities and how they influence our purchases and our connection with each community. So there's a lot of data on there. As I mentioned, the COVID related surveys, we have a consumer report on there. Lots of data, cmi.info. Just go there and download stuff. We'd love you to be our client, but whether you are or not, we love you. And we really, really appreciate your participating today. So we're going to wrap it up.